Considering the success of Ace Combat 4, Namco felt it was natural to continue it off with Ace Combat 5. But is it truly soaring into the air like its predecessor? Just from this commercial that you see from sitting on the title screen for a long time, I mean just wow. You have to admit that Namco really felt like they were onto something with the sequel to Shattered Skies. With a plot that seemed totally out the window involving the demon of Raz Grease, it really felt like Namco really felt like they hit the nail on the head and that they were really going out of their way to show their true love for the series with the 5th installment. So, what exactly is Ace Combat 5? Well, it's a flight sim game. But it's not just any flight sim game. I mean, can you imagine what it would be like if it was just any old flight sim game? No, because that would be fucking boring. So here we are, Ace Combat 5. A game that promises to deliver on story, on whammon, something that the previous titles wasn't able to deliver on. I'm serious. Immediately, one of the first things that the player is introduced to is a drop of blood dropping from what appears to be a small edge. This game really knows how to pull you in with that introduction. From there, the main character, Blaze, will explain the aspects of the story, how the country of Belka was overrun to the point that they were very much surrounded. However, they did not surrender, doing quite the unthinkable by unleashing a nuclear blast that wiped out the entirety of the invaders. As far as I'm concerned, I think this is why the squadron is very small in the beginning of the game. Story does a very good job at emphasizing each character's role within the squadron and how the squadron is involved within the story. You understand how Nagase is an important character, not just within the gameplay, but also in the game story. And you understand how Blaze is also a fully realized character, unlike Mobius 1, who is mainly mute. So in that case, the story of Ace Combat 5 is presented a lot better than Ace Combat 4, in the sense that it really tries to emphasize that more character dynamic that are a part of the squadron, whereas in Ace Combat 4, it was the main character and the pilot were two different characters in two different places at once. Nagase was probably my favorite character of these, considering that she was the embodiment of the anti-war themes within the game, considering that her values are tested by the very fact that she was being accused of killing innocent civilians during one mission. It really shows how much of a character that she is starting to become fully realized, and how she is struggling the moral tide that the war was bringing. Her character was probably my favorite of the entire squadron. However, other characters such as Grim and were also very well thought out characters, and I thought some of the funny banter that they seemed to exchange really seemed to flesh them out as within the missions and prevented the missions from feeling too dull. And overall, I really enjoyed the more focus aspect of the squadrons over the individual, like Ace Combat 4 did. The squadron's morals are put to the test when they are accused of killing innocent civilians during one mission. It really shows that despite the fact that they like to think of themselves as the protectors of peace, the squadron might actually be the ones who are propelling the destructive values of war, much to Nagase's dismay. My favorite part in Ace Combat 5 is when Squadron 8492 came to pick up the escort plane that we helped survey through the field under the supposed command of the Allies. However, when all the pilots went to court, they came to the realization that 8492 was not a part of the Ocean Squadron allies. It really shows just how calculating the enemy could be in war, and it also shows the amount of mental pressure that is starting to accumulate within each of the pilot's mind. Ace Combat 5 also puts a lot of emphasis on the deleterious nature of war. It feels more blunt compared to the fourth game, since more politics is involved. After it begins to feel as if the war is starting to come to an end, the pilots are immediately taken to be traitors by the 8492 Squadron. Apparently, the 8492 Squadron is a group of Belkan fighters, which makes there be a third nation involved that is trying to extend the war for a long period of time. Belka seems to be giving nuclear weapons to both sides. This game raises the tension of the plot by having a third nation be involved with the war. It certainly has more of an action movie sense than the fourth game, but it also lacks the down-to-earth nature of its predecessor. In Ace Combat 4, it really felt like you were seeing the effect you were having as the war went on. Ace Combat 5 feels more direct in the sense that the missions are the story vehicles that are telling the story of the pilots. This makes the radio chatter feel more personalized among the pilots.
This northern sea is where the demon of Rosgreaves came from.
Rosgreaves?
Huh. There's no way that could have been the Rosgreaves.
Hold your chatter. Commencing comm-out procedure shortly. Maintain radio silence.
Guess I'll cut off the mic and try talking to myself.
Blaze, Fox 1.
Unbelievable!
We gotta bag all these planes?
You think every enemy plane in the area is up and flying?
Well, let's ask them.
Ace Combat 5 also has a feature where you get to say yes or no to certain quotes that your fellow pilots are asking you.
Report from the Eloy. Picking up something on radar.
There's way too many signatures on radar. Kid, Nagase, how about you guys?
My radar is showing strange results as well. Something's going on.
Hey, you don't
connecting.
Yeah, it's a good deal of interaction with the other pilots, and it also adds a lot more story beats as you continue on throughout the game, which makes it feel all the more complex. And this leads us into the gameplay. What differentiates Ace Combat 5 from Ace Combat 4 is that it puts more emphasis on the squadron. You can choose the different planes that the squadron fly in, and you can give commands in the middle of missions on what you want your other members of the squadron to do as the captain. This makes the gameplay of Ace Combat 5 feel more holistic compared to Ace Combat 4, which felt more individualistic. Considering that you are flying together as a group, it makes it feel like the squadron is really one big team over simply one plane doing the majority of the work. Ace Combat 5 has a lot of interesting missions, and they all feel very distinct. Some of these missions include fighting in the middle of a snowstorm in order to rescue a POW group, or trying to find Nagase in the middle of the mountains while she is fleeing from other Yuktobania fighters, to name a few missions off the top of my head. All of these missions just feel really distinct and separate from one another to the point that the game doesn't feel very repetitive, despite the fact that the missions seem to take a more linear structure. Another distinct feature that Ace Combat 5 has is that sometimes the radio chatter will add more details to the narrative. This is apparent with the mission where they are trying to rescue prisoners from a POW camp, and Nagase questions whether Captain Barlett, who sacrificed his life to save hers in one of the missions, is inside the camp, to which the helicopter pilot responds with a no. You might notice that I'm talking a lot about Nagase. That's because the story really feels like it's focused on her when it's not going over a lot of lore. It turns out that one of the books that she was writing in was actually a book of the Demon of Razgris from her childhood that her mother always used to read to her, and she kept it because she always felt like those memories were slipping away. In many ways, she represents sort of anti-war side of the whole plot. Dare I say it, an embodiment of it. The fact that each member of your squadron is being controlled in the game and also takes place in the story makes certain events have a lot more impact. For instance, I'm sure many of you know the big twist in the middle of the game, but when Chopper died, it truly had a huge impact on the narrative of the game, and you just couldn't help but feel the impact of his death when you're left with only 3-plane squadron instead of a 4-plane squadron. Considering Chopper was one of the more likable ones with his perky attitude and great sense of humor, it really hits home when he dies in the middle of the game. And just listen to that plane chatter as Nagase and Grim team up and try to destroy the enemy forces. they literally become the embodiment of the demons of Rosgreaves, letting the demons overtake them in order to avenge their friend's death. Until his death, Chopper had always felt like the one that lightened the load off of all the other aces that were flying with him. He was the one that cooled off the anger of Nagase, and he was the one that was also very kind and open to the newly pilot Grip. And this is ultimately what makes his death all the more impactful. Words cannot describe how Chopper's death hit me. I actually kind of teared up during this part. Usually I'm not really someone to really tear up all that often. Just the music Into the Dusk that was playing in the background, while Nagase and Grim grunted and screamed as they struggled against the enemy before them. It all felt like a very emotional experience. The soundtrack of Ace Combat 5 is honestly the same typical soundtrack that you'd expect to hear, especially from its predecessor Ace Combat 4. However, I will say that there are some different pieces that do stand out that kind of differ in tone compared to Ace Combat 4.
War Dog, thanks for holding out for us. The reinforcements are here. Enemy planes retreating. We just got word from the ground. Except for a few injuries and the
Into the
confusion
Dusk
following the evacuation.
is a very melancholy, somber piece of music to express Chopper's death. It is the type of music that really sets itself apart from other Ace Combat music because of its slow and saddening tone that actually made me emotional while I was listening. The soundtracks in the game they are filled with vim and energy, such as Operation Whitebird Part 1.
Into the ground. You with me? I guess we don't have any other choice. I can't believe that's our strategy.
Airborne tanks are dropping from the transport plane.
Can you count all those parachutes? I gave up already.
Overall, the sound design of Ace Combat 5 is very solid and something that I actually like listening to from time to time. It has the instrumentation that Ace Combat 4 had, and is probably one of the best video game soundtracks that I've ever listened to. Sadly, I couldn't quite say the same thing about the sound design. The missiles feel like they blow up like a wet fart.
Stadium in sight. Secure the airspace until the Coruscant squadron arrives.
Let's just forget that I actually made a fart joke there. Okay? Wait, there goes my fucking legitimacy in being a classy reviewer. Oh well. It was good while it lasted. If there was anything negative I would say about Ace Combat 5, it would be that I sometimes feel that the missions are a bit too constrained, considering that it focuses more on narrative style missions. You see, Ace Combat 4 had a lot of missions where you flew around in an open city, blowing shit up. However, in Ace Combat 5, none of those missions exist, and most of them are very much constrained to a simple goal. Some of them include flying through a field while avoiding enemy circles, or others would involve flying through a canyon in order to take out all enemy fire in order to have a group blow up a system in the base. Either way, I would consider that none of these missions are repetitive, and they all feel like they change things up in some way. For instance, there's one mission that requires you to not fire on any targets and take some reconnaissance photos while avoiding the spy circles of the enemy. This is very unique because it separates itself from the usual shooting gameplay that is often come to expect from Ace Combat games. Overall, I would consider Ace Combat 5 something that is worth checking out. It was something that I'd consider to be a positive experience, and one that really improves over its predecessor in a lot of different ways. However, I wouldn't say that it's the best game I've ever played. However, I will say that it is perhaps one of the best, with a very rich story that focuses more on the pilots than a separate character, to the variety in the gameplay. Overall, I thought Ace Combat 5 was a very positive experience, and most of the good aspects of the game outweighed negative. The game ends with the nations of Osea and Yuttabania coming together after the President Harding gives a speech with the Yuttabania Prime Minister. This causes all the planes from Yuttabania to unite and fight against the nation of Belka, which was tearing them apart. The game has you flying through a tunnel, which made me die
We'll just have to stay glued to the captain.
A separate plane going in from the other side? How many pilots have we got that can even do something like that?
I know one.
Don't try anything risky. Fly straight ahead. Stray off course and we're done for.
We can't turn back now. We have to keep moving.
Enemy plane flying in from the rear. It's Hamilton. Damn, he is.
After that, the Rosgreaves goes on one final mission to destroy the superweapon Solg, from destroying the countries of Osea and Yuttabania. And here is where I really felt like the ending got interesting. It says that the Rosgreaves squadron disappeared for unknown whereabouts. The only thing being they were all shot down at Sand Island. This gives a bit of a legendary feel to the tale, as if we were playing through past events that were being narrated to us. The credits roll singing Journey Home, concluding one of the best games I've ever played.